Tom was working on the new test data. It was boring and time-consuming, but it was the essence of all the work he and his team had done on the test flight over the past month. So, like it or not, he was collecting and collating information to analyze. A text notification came to his phone. He saw the screen flash but didn't pay attention to the sender's name. A few minutes passed before he caught a pause in the data and tore his gaze away from the monitor. He picked up the phone and looked at the notification. It was from a number that wasn't registered in his contacts, and although the area code was local, he didn't recognize the number. For a moment, he was about to delete it as spam but changed his mind, deciding to just open it and see if it could be a message from someone on the team whose phone number he hadn't saved yet. He clicked on the text, and a message appeared on the screen. First, he was confused. Who could have sent him a candid shot? There, clear as day, was an intimate photo on his phone. He read the message. "Look carefully, you still have time. Bradley's pub." He reread it again, thought for a moment, and then chuckled slightly. It wasn't often you got the wrong number sending intimate pictures. He was about to delete the message when he looked at the picture again, and his heart sank. He hadn't noticed her at first. His attention had been on other things, but now he saw the mole on her left leg, so small that it was immediately invisible. The tiny mole belonged to Tanya, his wife, to whom he had been married for the past 6 years. He stared again, disbelieving, looking for anything to disprove what he had seen with his own eyes. But the closer he looked, the more convinced he became that his attractive wife was in front of him. He reread the message again. Bradley's was a pub he and Tanya had never been to. It was in a neighboring town. But why Bradley's at 6 o'clock at night? Tanya was on her way to Boston. Her team was preparing an important proposal for a contract, and the presentation was scheduled for Monday afternoon. The entire team was flying there today, meeting to finalize the presentation tomorrow, and making final preparations on Sunday before the presentation. Tanya was one of the directors, so of course, she was there to get ready. It was 5:15 in the evening. She was scheduled to land in Boston at 4:30. Normally, she would call when she landed, but one could assume she was busy packing up the team and all their stuff and heading to the hotel. He thought about calling but decided to answer the message first. "Who is this? Where did you get that picture? Am I supposed to meet you at Bradley's?" He texted. He started to panic. He decided he was going to go to Bradley's place one way or another. He had to get an answer. He texted Tanya, "How's the flight? I'm going to grab a bite to eat. Call me when you're free." He was going to keep a low profile and try to figure out what was going on. He was on his way to the car when the phone beeped again. Tanya, he thought, and opened the phone. The message was a reply from the mysterious caller. "I'll be there, but I'm sure you'll find someone more interesting there than me." Now, he was starting to feel dizzy. He opened the navigator on his phone and took a quick step toward his car. Bradley's was 30 minutes away. It was 5:40 now. He had to get there shortly after 6 in the evening. He had no idea how important it was to meet the deadline, so he headed straight there, hoping to make it in time to meet someone who seemed interesting. On the way, his phone beeped again. This time it was Tanya. "Crazy time with the team. I'll call you later before bed. Love you." He didn't think anything of it. Their conversation would happen later. He was more interested in the meeting at Bradley's and how the author of the message had gotten to know his wife so intimately. His heart was beating a mile a minute as he pulled into the parking lot at 6:12. The sender of the message hadn't given him any hint as to who he was looking for, so he assumed that whoever wanted to meet him here knew him and would get in touch themselves. But what bothered him the most was the comment that there was someone more interesting. The sender of the message clearly knew something he didn't, and he felt like he was walking into a setup, but he couldn't think of any other way to find out. The picture had sent his insides into turmoil. He trusted her completely, and their personal life was perfect, at least he thought so. But there was only one way someone could have gotten a picture of his wife, and he was going to find out in about 5 minutes. The thought of the finality of that answer made him dread it. He stepped inside and let his eyes adjust to the dim lighting. Not knowing the pub or its location, he stepped away from the door for a moment and looked around. There was a large hall in front of him and a bar to his left. He walked over to the bar, found a seat closer to the end, and sat down. The bartender had just finished taking an order from a well-dressed customer and approached Tom to take his order. He asked for a menu and turned to look around the room. His attention was caught by a man who had just gotten a drink order and was walking across the room to a table full of smiling people. Then he saw what the sender of the message was implying. Sitting at the table and accepting a drink from a well-dressed man, Tanya was smiling and dressed to impress in a little black dress and pearls. He was acting on autopilot. He stood up and walked over to the table where Tanya was sitting. He was 2 steps away from her when she saw him. Her face changed to an open smile, and her wide-open eyes reflected fear. He didn't slow his step for a second as he approached the table. Tom grabbed the well-dressed man by the hair with his left hand. He yanked sharply, and the well-dressed man dropped his drinks and began to fall backward, losing his balance and screaming in pain. As he pulled the man, he let go of his left arm and prepared to deliver a right punch to the man's face, but realized the man had backed up too quickly and fell on his ass before Tom could attack him further. He took 1 step toward him and recognized him. "Don't get up, Pete," Tom said. "I mean it." Pete looked up from his drink-soaked suit, which lay in a crumpled heap at Tom's feet. He nodded without moving or saying a word. Tom looked back at Tanya. The entire table had fallen into silence. He recognized several people, all of whom were part of Tanya's team and had been to his house for picnics and get-togethers. Team loyalty seemed to be turning to infidelity, he thought, except for one person. Someone sitting in front of him at this moment knew the truth and decided to tell it to him. He thought about finding out who it was, but only for a moment, and then decided it wasn't worth pursuing further. "I'm going home," he said. "If you're waiting for any chance to save our marriage, then go home right now." She nodded and started to get up, but he held up his hand. "You'd better give me a minute to leave." Before he turned to leave, he looked at Betty Wilson and Bob Thornton sitting next to her. "Betty, does Bill think you're in Boston too?" "Bob, is it Alice who thinks so?" They lowered their eyes and could not meet his gaze, let alone answer his question. "Isn't the whole crew asleep?" he thought. Unfortunately, he knew that at least one of them was definitely asleep. The ride home went by automatically. He didn't even have time to be surprised when he found himself in his driveway. He entered the house, grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, and sat down in the living room. He knew Bill Wilson and Alice Thornton. The other 2 couples he didn't recognize. There were 4 in all. He pondered whom to call, Bob or Alice. He realized he didn't want to talk and didn't know much, but at the same time, Betty and Bob were there and having fun. He decided to write them a message. He quickly scribbled a message to both of them. "Just heard from Tony that the plans for the business trip seem to have changed. Better call to get the latest news." Now they knew something had happened and could decide whether to investigate it further or not. At least his conscience was clear. About 20 minutes later, he heard the garage door open, and Tanya pulled into the garage. He waited in the living room. She walked in, still dressed but no longer wearing her "come take me" sneakers or jewelry. She seemed calm as she entered the living room and sat across from him on the couch. He remained silent and waited for her to begin. He knew that simple silence was a powerful tool in any discussion. He decided that the silence would last as long as it took. It didn't take long to wait. Tanya seemed ready to explode. "It's not what you think," she began. He held up his hand, urging her to be quiet. "You have absolutely no idea what I think about what I saw tonight," Tom replied. "I don't need much backstory. We're both engineers, and I think you know as well as I do that there's no real or objective answer to any why question. Inevitably, it's just a rationale to mitigate bad results. So I'm not even going to ask the why question. Let's start with something simpler. How much time is there? How many of them? How often do our friends, other than the outcasts at the table, know about it? Am I known as your cuckold among your coworkers and our friends?" "No, Tom, it's not like that at all," Tanya said. "We, the team, had our travel plans scrapped, And instead of going home and starting over tomorrow, Pete suggested we stay in town and rest for a day before the start. I didn't see the whole team there. Where was everyone else? Tom asked. When we heard the news, some of the team decided to stay home another night and meet us at the airport tomorrow, she admitted. But you decided to. Lie to me, he replied. You seemed pretty close to Pete. Maybe there's something going on between you two that you'd like to tell me about. Well, for starters, Pete is fine. And he's convinced the owners of the Bradley not to press charges, she said in a confident tone. His eyes widened in surprise at her devotion to Pete. I don't care about your boyfriend. If that dumbass hadn't tripped over his own feet, I would have broken his nose. By the way, the jury is still out on that one, Tom said. Let him press charges. I've already spent a night in jail. It doesn't scare me. Do you love him? Tanya was silent for a moment. He realized she was gathering her thoughts. Yes, silence was indeed a powerful tool, and his mind was working overtime to fill the space left by her silence in the conversation. But it didn't look like it was going to end well. He's not my boyfriend. There's absolutely nothing going on between us. Yes, I should have told you about the travel plans, but it seemed like such a trifle whether I was in the city or Boston. You weren't expecting me, and I was still with my team. All we did was eat before heading to our rooms. You had no reason to behave the way you did. He just brought drinks. You embarrassed me in front of my team. She was now fully in attack mode, trying to bluff and intimidate to clear her way. He opened his phone, found the picture, and slid the phone toward her across the coffee table. He realized from the look on her face that she remembered the photo and the circumstances, and knew it couldn't be denied. She started up again, this time moderating her fervor. He grabbed his phone off the table, discreetly launched the voice recording app, and put the phone in his shirt pocket. "E.T. Tom, our team," she stammered, searching for a word, "is very close-knit in many ways. Most of us," she began. "We have a small group that meets regularly. All of them were at Bradley's. We were the main force that hatched the bulk of the ideas for this proposal. You know how long it took me to get our team together. I don't know how it started, but it was not long after Pete took over the company. We worked closely together. He brought me on board, and it just worked itself out." Tom replied, "Close contact doesn't just happen. A lot of conscious decisions are made. We both know that, so please don't insult me." "So it's been almost 6 months," he answered one of his questions. "That's when Pete signed the contract, right?" She nodded. "The team," he began again. "You all?" He brushed the thought away without naming it. "You mean all of you together?" She nodded again. "Pete said it was good for building trust and team dynamics. Is that what he said to convince you all to form a weird team? Now you're being rude. So much more than just that. I feel such a connection to Pete and my team, much more than I ever have before." Tony's bravado was making itself felt again. He had a bad feeling that nothing good would come of this. "Unfortunately, I have to say that there will likely be personnel changes on your team," Tom said. "What did you do?" Tanya shrieked. "Tom, if I tell anyone else, it will ruin more lives. Leave them to make their own decisions. We have to come to an agreement without them. Tanya, you have to know I can't be a silent accomplice. I like Bob and Alice. In fact, I like them a lot more than I like Betty and Bill right now," he added. "I've written to them that the travel plans seem to have changed. How your buddies respond to their spouses and how their spouses accept those responses is entirely up to them. I can sleep easy having made my decision. Tom, we have the most productive team in the history of CR Incorporated." She was practically yelling at him. "And so are you, Mr. with a capital letter. Just because we have team planning meetings on Wednesdays doesn't mean you missed anything. I never interrupted you. You always had access to me. That picture you showed me. You want to know about it now?" She was mocking him. "It was right after that. What you can't see is Betty. Now you know. If you don't know about it, then it didn't happen, right?" My jaw dropped as I listened to the extent of the deception and the depths of my ignorance. And now, just because your poor ego is bruised, you want to destroy everything my team and I have accomplished. Tanya hissed. Getting angrier and angrier, it was infectious. Tom felt his heartbeat increase as Tanya continued to defend her strange team, and he got even angrier. For a moment, as he drove home from Bradley's, he thought that if it was just one time with Pete, maybe he could forgive him. That thought had died a bloody but quick death long ago. He didn't need to hear anything else. He didn't want to hear anything more. But she went on. No, sir, we won't let you break things. You will write to Bob and Alice and tell them that you have heard from me and that we are stuck in Atlanta but have booked a flight for the morning. Betty and Bill will use this story. And you'll back them up, so help me, she shouted. The value of this deal is in the tens of millions, and your hurt feelings don't mean a damn thing. Send a message, and we'll discuss how we move forward. Move on, Tom shouted. We're not going to be able to deal with this in the future. You're leaving now, your sick crew and your bastard Pete can go on with your lives as you wish. We're done. I'll get a lawyer this week and put him to work. It's simple, 50-50. You keep your pension. I keep mine, said Tom. Get out of here. Your creepy office has a reservation in town. Use it. Go to Boston and get another awesome win for yourself and your team. Tom, please send those emails. Tanya spoke in a much softer tone, pleading with him. If we lose Betty or Bill before the presentation, the company could lose millions. You and I could lose tens, maybe hundreds of thousands in commissions and bonuses. Just think of where we could go with that money. Just you and me. Forget it. Please, Tom. Don't let the unfounded worry about some random contact throw us off. Pete says I'll get to executive status quickly, and all I have to do is keep doing what we're doing now for a few more years. Don't you want that for me? For you? She asked. Tanya, just go away, he said. He had just enough time to say it before he was hit hard in the back, and the wind was knocked out of him as he continued to fall to the floor, with a knee in his back. Don't touch him, Tanya shouted. Too hard, she added caustically. So the jury's still out on breaking my nose, huh? Pete asked, leaning over and bringing his face close to Tom's as he lay pinned to the floor. Tony must have had a transmitter, Tom thought. Now I know whose team she plays for. Let's see who gets their nose broken. Pete grinned. Take his phone and type messages for him. We don't have time for this. Someone jerked him up off the floor. It was someone else. Tom had deliberately played up the semi-consciousness, forcing the guy behind him to put a lot of effort into lifting him to his feet. That gave him some of the information he needed. His captor was a weak office bastard and wheezed from the effort it took to get Tom to his feet after the blow. Tom would regain his breath and get back in the game. Unlike Pete and his team of well-groomed salesmen, Tom's team worked in the field in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. His engineering team wasn't even close to them, but while spending time with the crews during test missions, the team was invited to work on their biceps in Pillsbury under the guidance of a few hardworking instructors who flew airplanes. His team had modified specifically for them. If these people showed up on your doorstep, it was only because they had been sent there, and your days on Earth were coming to an end. Tom and his team created the gadgets needed to get into hot spots, and more importantly, get out of them. Tom's team was proud that their designs had helped accomplish the mission and get everyone home. The guys and their scary passengers were very grateful to Team Tom for the hard work they put in to make their gear work. And the scariest guy in the group was Staff Sergeant Troy Baker. MSGT was well known to those who lived in his world. Everyone, from recruits to colonels, treated him with the respect he earned by leading his men through missions all over the world. He was known for never leaving anyone behind enemy lines. That reputation was forever cemented during his mission in Colombia. Sergeant Baker told the young lieutenant platoon leader to stay close. It was his first LTS mission, and Sergeant Baker thought he was doing well for a rookie. When the enemy ambushed their group, they were able to fight back. But then, he looked over and saw the lieutenant on the ground, bleeding from a head wound. A medic who jumped up said he was checking vital signs. Baker knelt down, grabbed the medic's hand and said, "His rescue is the first priority." The medic replied, "He's not alive." Maybe he is, Baker agreed. But he's still coming home with us. The medic looked at him as if he had just lost his mind. They'd be lucky to get their asses back. But carrying a dead guy? What was he thinking? MSGT read his mind. I'd do the same for you, Billy, he said to the doctor. Stay close in case I need you. What happened became legendary when they returned to the base. Doc met them as the helicopter was coming in for a landing. The medic explained to Doc that the lieutenant had made him do it. Doc nodded his head and pulled a flashlight pen from his pocket. The medic watched in amazement as the lieutenant's pupils narrowed in the pen's sharp beam of light. Would you care to reconsider your diagnosis, doctor? Doc asked the medic as the lieutenant was sent into the operating room. He was one of those people who had no age. He never talked much, but when he did, everyone listened to him. He was an echo of the past, handcrafted and unique, and seemed to give a special luster to Tom and his team during the long hours of downtime between missions. MSGT showed his appreciation by teaching Tom and the crew some basic but effective defense and hand-to-hand combat techniques. He told the engineers that it's best to know a few things just in case. I know the biggest danger you can face is a jammed copier or a nasty paper cut, but if you stay in this business, you're going to have to go to some dangerous places. So now, if you're lucky enough to meet any of the local colorful characters, you'll have something to fall back on. Sergeant Baker is finished, but let's hope the paper cut is the worst you'll face. Tom let his breathing recover, pulled himself together, and leaned his back against his opponent, letting him think he was holding Tom down. He remembered the fighting techniques MSGT had shown them. You can find yourself in a position where you have no choice but to take a hit. Sucks, but it happens. The key is to remember that even when you get hit, you can still fight back. You just have to be smarter than the one who hits you. Tom remembered the lesson and leaned his back against his opponent, passively fighting back and draining his strength. Give me the phone, Pete said, looking Tom straight in the eye. Now you know I've had a hard time getting in touch with your wife, Tom. Me and all the guys on the team did too. Tony's done it more times than I can remember, and probably more times than you've ever done it. Forget the macho stuff, Tom. You're just another weak, stupid guy. Do as we ask, and maybe you can perform with Tanya when the team isn't using her. Don't forget the toys you can buy with her bonus money. That should ease the pain a little. Hell, maybe Tanya can buy you something nice for when she's busy with the team. Tom kept his mouth shut while Pete took great pleasure in humiliating him and forcing him to do his bidding. Where's the phone, Tom? Pete asked, and immediately saw the outline of a phone in Tom's shirt pocket. Ah, there it was, Pete said, reaching for it with his right hand. Tom stepped back sharply, kicking the right heel of the guy holding him in the shin, then stepped on the toe of his expensive shoe. He flexed his arms and broke free of his opponent's grip, who screamed in pain and collapsed. Tom saw Pete's eyes widen with understanding as Tom's right arm stretched forward. He turned his shoulder, as MSGT had shown him, and slammed his fist into the center of Pete's face with maximum force. Pete collapsed to the floor in shock. Tom turned around to see who was holding him. It was Bill. He was lying on the floor, holding his leg. I think you hurt my leg, he whimpered. Tom had stepped on his foot where it was broken, and Bill cried out in pain. That should clear up all your doubts, you idiot, Tom shouted. Turning around, he saw Pete on the floor, still trying to recover. Tom walked over to him, leaned his face close to Pete's ear and said, Looks like it was your nose that broke, Pete. I just don't want to dwell on it. He gave Pete one more firm nudge. Pete fell unconscious. Tom's adrenaline was kicking in, and his breathing became erratic. He looked around the living room for Tony. At that moment, he felt a hard blow to the middle of his back and the base of his neck. He dropped to one knee and turned to face the next attack. Looking up, he saw Tanya with a cast-iron skillet in her hands. She missed, and the skillet slid harmlessly across Tom. He quickly regained his footing and prepared for the next move. Feet and roughly snatched the skillet from her hands. Tom, we can still make it work, she said. Think of the money you're throwing away. I'll stop all this nonsense. I'll stop all this, I promise. Just you and me, just like old times. Tom rubbed the back of his head with his left hand and looked at her, stunned at how quickly she was changing from one tone to another. For a second, he remembered the alien in John Carpenter's movie The Thing, who changed shape with each new challenge. He smiled at the thought. Tanya took that smile as agreement with her last request and moved to hug Tom. He lowered his left arm from her neck to hug her. Then, after thinking for a millisecond, he raised his right hand and slapped her. Not hard enough to knock her out, but hard enough to break a bone. Tanya screamed and collapsed to the floor. That hurt like hell, didn't it, silly? Tom asked, eyes watering. Can't see anything, can't breathe, covered in blood. It works every time. Why did you hit me? She couldn't stop sobbing. Because you're mean and I could have, was his reply. His phone was still on and recording. Not everything was in his favor, but he felt he had enough to justify his actions. He quickly looked around the room and remembered what MSGT had told him. Decide when you can act and don't move until the moment is right. But when you do what you can and don't stop until no one can move but you. He looked around. Other than Bill whimpering in the corner and Tony trying to stop the blood flowing from his nose, he was the only one moving. It doesn't look like you, lover boy, and Mr. Bill will be in any condition to perform on Monday. Now who's going to get all those millions and big bonuses? Tom went on. I wonder what Art will say when he finds out about this. He was about to call 911 but waited, knowing that once the police showed up, he'd lose his chance to question Tanya. He walked over to where she was sitting. She was holding a kitchen towel to her face. Tom lowered himself down beside her. With his thumb and forefinger, he pinched the bridge of her nose. Like this? He demonstrated to her what to do. The adrenaline surge was off the charts and he suddenly lost all strength and sank down heavily across from Tony. Where had his wife gone? The Tanya he'd known for so many years was not the same woman sitting in front of him, and he wondered again how she'd managed to deceive him for so long. Had it been worth it? He asked. Tanya looked at him and shook her head. Maybe it was worth it, she said. If you'd just come with us, we were so close. After Monday, I'd be on my way to the executive suite. This would set me back. I can fix it, but it would set me back. So that's all you wanted? To be vice president? Tom asked. What about us? The deception? The lies? Will it continue? Tom, you're so naive. Pete knew it. He told me that your black and white ethics and Boy Scout views would hold me back if I let them. He said I had to break free of your control and be myself if I wanted to succeed. Did he tell you that before or after he made you a seed collector for the team? Tom asked. Like you don't know how it is. She spat out. Oh, I tried to be a good girl and do all the things you said would further my career. Do you want to know what really works? Tom remained silent. When someone decides to blow themselves up, sometimes you just have to get out of the way. She was still taking notes. Okay, I'll tell you, my loving husband. All those things you told me didn't work. I worked my ass off to get all the assignments done on time and on budget, and all I got were a few accolades. It wasn't until Betty took me aside that I learned what really takes for a woman to succeed. So this was going on even before Pete came along? Tom asked. Oh, for a clever engineer. You can be awfully slow sometimes, Tom, she said. It happened at a Christmas party, a year after I joined Kara Incorporated, when I was doing this sort of thing for the first time in my life. And I never looked back. Wait, do you do that with your boss too? Art Vanderlei? Tom asked incredulously. Yes, Tom. Art, Pete, Bill, all the team members who can help me in my career. It doesn't cost me anything. It's so easy for me to control you men when I can lead you around by the nose. Especially you. All I have to do is show you my body, and I'll guide you where I need you to go. She continued, even now, when you think you've got it all figured out, we told Art where we were going when we set off. He's gathering the rest of the team now. They'll be given a cover story about our absence. They'll have to work without us, but I think the extra effort we put in with their purchasing manager will pay off. I really want to hear this, he thought. Oh heck, why not? Extra effort. Tom nudged him. You've always been a dude, or Tanya. In fact, it was so easy, I don't even want to call it effort. She laughed. As the old joke goes, the worst thing I ever did in my life was great. She continued, it was so easy at the Challenger conference with the men that we had to get a little more creative with Brenda, the lead woman on the selection committee. It's funny that I can even seduce a woman, but I had to bring in old Pete as a striker. She was a real gimmick, as I recall. Things cleared up for her around the same time, and with the promise of more when we started working together after the contract. Yes, the selection committee is in our pocket. Then what's the point of all this if everything is greased? What's the point of all these attacks on me? Tom asked. It was Pete's idea, dumbass. I told him to chill, that I'd come home, trick you, and get back just in time to catch my plane. But he had to act like an alpha. Look where that got us. Like I said, it's fixable, but I'm going to have to shell out. You're not going to buy me that cheap, he said. Maybe not, replied Tanya. But I'd still fly away. Well, you're definitely not going to fly away now, he said, remembering that Pete seemed so knowledgeable. He figured Tanya must have a transmitter with him. Art, are you listening? Tom thought. I'm going to call the police. I'm sure there's a lot of felonies involved, and we haven't even gotten on the trail of your fraud yet. This is a federal contract. Isn't it, Tanya? Tom asked rhetorically. Yes, the feds sure aren't going to like, as you put it, your extra effort. I'm sure you've got great lawyers and all, but maybe there's an alternative. He left it at that. A moment later, the melody of the song Say Hello, Chief played on Tony's cell phone. Art? She asked into the receiver. Sure, I'll put it on speaker. Tom's voice came over the speaker. Let me first apologize to you. Pete's actions were a gross error in judgment. I can assure you that the board of directors will deal with him decisively. Thank you, Art. I'm relieved. I'm glad you and the board took the attacks and fraud so seriously. Tom, these allegations are very unpleasant. The lawyers will get rich, but nobody wants to rock the boat. We might pay a fine, Pete and Bill might get community service, but you'll end up divorced and twice as poor, Art explained in a businesslike manner. Am I hearing some kind of offer? Tom asked. Tanya always said you were the smarter of the two of you. Still, I'm glad I hired Tanya. Yes, Tom, there is definitely an offer, Art continued. Tom, we replaced you with your wife, and when you found out about it, you were treated in the most disgusting way. Well, considering all that, not my blood on the floor. Blood? I guess it was a feeble and not entirely successful attempt. Tom intervened. Tom, Art continued. Instead of calling the police like you want, we could have worked out a deal. I just sent a picture to Tony's cell phone. Well, not me, but one of my technicians. They said it would disappear after viewing it. Take a look at it. Maybe it will help restore some goodwill. Tanya turned the phone toward Tom. He saw it. It said Bank of Grand Cayman and a very large number. And when will this be deposited into the account? Tom asked. It's already there, Tom. You got a letter with the account number on it. This has been a very bad day for you, Tom. This may be a difficult decision for you, and I'm not discounting emotions. Tanya is a very desirable woman. However, be that as it may, you can't take emotions to the bank, can you? Art asked. You can't, Tom agreed, parodying Art's manner of speech. Crumb Inc. will cover the costs of your divorce. You'll never reconcile. I think we all realize that. Tanya will sign the papers. She'll only ask for her personal belongings and her pension. He thought for a moment before answering. On the one hand, he could be principled, expose the whole sordid affair, and let it go. On the other hand, he could just walk away. Art had just given him 5 million reasons to do just that. Did CR Incorporated have a medical staff? Tom asked. Yes, Tom. I think we have some doctors, Art replied. Great, said Tom. Better load them into the limo and send them down here to pick up your team. So you don't mind then? Art asked. Absolutely not, Tom replied. Are we done, Tom? Art asked. Goodbye, Art, Tom said and hung up. Tom pulled out his phone, turned off the recording app, and slipped it back into his pocket. I knew you'd get. It's our way, Tom. We can still be friends. Friends with benefits when this is all over. Tanya smiled, what she thought was her most charming smile, but even her dazzling smile couldn't change the effects of her ruined nose. Her eyes were darkened, blood caked under her nose, and dry drops ran down her chin. Tom found the sight comical and allowed himself a smile once again. Tanya misinterpreted his smile as consent and leaned in to kiss him. Tom reached out his right hand to stop her. He put his palm around her face and pushed her back until she fell to the couch with a clatter. Either I hit you too hard or not hard enough. In what world would I want to kiss you, Tanya? Or should I say, a girl of easy virtue? He said. She looked at him resentfully. Take whatever you want and get out of here, Tom said and headed for the door. He stopped next to Bill. Does your leg still hurt? He asked. Yes, you bastard. It still hurts, Bill whimpered. Maybe this will take your mind off the pain in your leg, Tom said, and kicked Bill twice. Bill wriggled and groaned. Tom walked over to Pete, who had managed to sit up. Pete raised his arms in a helpless attempt to close himself off from Tom. I'm begging you. Don't hit me again, Pete cried. I'm not going to hit you, Pete, Tom replied, and Pete smiled victoriously. It was so easy with that nerd. His smile disappeared the moment Tom stepped on him with his foot, and several times he squealed and passed out. Spitting in the face of his soon-to-be ex-wife, Tom walked out of the house. He got into his car, not knowing where to go, but he needed food and shelter above all else. He grabbed a hamburger at a takeout diner, checked into a motel on the outskirts of town, not far from the freeway, and fell asleep as soon as his head touched the pillow. The next morning, he woke up early and dragged his aching body out of bed. He was making coffee in his motel room when a message popped up on his phone, and he reached for it. It was a message from a number he already knew, and he immediately opened it. Sorry about yesterday. I can meet up at the mall at noon. I'll wave you over. I'll be there. He texted back and poured warm brown water from the coffee maker into a paper cup. Yeah, I'll be there, he thought, and turned on his laptop. Time to do some online banking. In college, long before he met Tanya, Tom had a divorced economics professor who always advocated having at least one offshore account for a rainy day fund. He was interested, and with the help of his professor, he soon owned a brand new bank account in the Cayman Islands. It was his U fund. He had opened this account 10 years ago and funded it at every opportunity. He was proud to have about $50,000 in his account now. His Utanya fund was about to get a serious boost. Tom set up a secure website for each bank with a password, and with a few keystrokes, he transferred the bulk of the CR Incorporated payment to his personal account. He left $100,000 in the old account. He showered, changed his clothes, and prepared to head out to meet the mysterious message sender. Tom entered the mall just after noon. As he entered, he saw a man waving at him. He appeared to be about Tom's age, handsome, and well-dressed. Tom walked up to him. I think it was you who sent me the message, Tom said, taking a seat. I'm sorry about the way things turned out. I don't know if I could have told you any easier. The stranger began. Why don't you start by telling me who you are and what you have in common with Tanya? Tom asked. I was on the team. I left the army after 8 years of service. I was wounded in combat, took a long time to recover, and was medically discharged. I joined CR Incorporated about 6 months ago. About 3 months ago, I was assigned to Pete's team. I was telling a friend about the job and mentioned that I worked for Tanya. When he asked her full name, we found out that we had a mutual friend, and he asked me to watch Tanya as a favor. Everything was great at first. I didn't immediately realize why he shuddered. Tanya approached me about 2 months later. She's extremely attractive and irresistible. But when I asked her about the ring, she just smiled and said, You're fine with it. I wasn't interested, so I told her so. That started the deep freeze. After I turned her down, I started getting assignments and nothing but reprimands from Pete. I called our mutual friend back and told him about Tanya reaching out to me. He decided there was more to it than Tanya had said, and that you should know. Pete sent me the picture when they were trying to get me on the team, kind of like a prize I could count on if I agreed. Let's just say I don't agree with their methods. I think I'm an honest man. I resigned yesterday and sent you a message. Who is our mutual friend? Tom asked. Troy Baker, he replied. If I hadn't met Troy. He paused for a moment before continuing. Let's just say he helped me out of a jam when I was a green lieutenant. I'm indebted to him for 1 or 2 favors. Tom agreed. What are you going to do? The stranger asked. Art had kind of made up his mind for me. I could get the police involved, and yes, Bill, Pete, and even Tony would get in trouble with the law. But with his lawyers, it would end up like a pothole in the road. We made a deal. You may think I'm selling out, and maybe in a way you're right, but they stole the one thing from me that was irreplaceable. If I can't make them pay legally, at least I can make them pay. It won't bring Tanya back, but I think I may find that she's less irreplaceable than I thought. I have a trip planned. Tell Troy thanks for everything. I'm not going back to work. What about you? Tom finally asked. Well, Troy always spoke highly of Baxter Incorporated, and now that you're gone, they may need another engineer. I think you'll find that things are a little different at Baxter. Maybe you'll like it better there. It's a challenge. But the added benefits won't compare to what Tony's team offered. The stranger smiled. I think I can live with that. The stranger stood up, and Tom did the same. They just nodded to each other and left without saying another word. Tom had just checked in for a flight to Costa Rica on Monday. Tamarindo would be a good place for a vacation, he thought. He headed toward security and saw a mailbox up ahead. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope addressed to the Department of Justice, Washington, D.C. Inside was a thumb drive with a recording. Maybe they'd be interested, he thought. Who knows? Maybe Art's lawyers aren't as good as he thought. He tossed the envelope into a drawer and walked over to the security line. Epilogue. 9 months later, Tom sat at his usual table in the cafe. Anna, charming as always, brought him his favorite cocktail. Thank you, darling, he said, bringing the glass to his lips. He had gotten the mail and still held the envelope in his hand. There was no return address. He wondered who had found it. He wasn't going to take any elaborate measures to go unnoticed, but finding him in a small town on the Pacific coast of northern Costa Rica would require means beyond the reach of the average person. His first thought was that Art's men had found him. He had left the letter at his house for 2 days. He was sure it wasn't a bomb, but one couldn't be too careful. Carlos, Tom turned to the cafe owner.
¿Tienes esto?
Sí, Señor Tom, Carlos said. Tom handed over the envelope and retreated a few steps. You can never be too careful, he thought as he watched Carlos open the envelope. Carlos held it out to Tom, who thanked him. He took another sip from his glass and turned the envelope over. Several pieces of paper fell on the table. He picked up a note. I thought you might find this interesting. That was all the note said. Instead of a signature, there was a phone number. Troy has the means to find me, he thought. I can live with that. He turned over another piece of paper. It was a copy of a newspaper article with a photograph. The picture showed Pete, Bill, Tanya, and Betty being led out of the CR Incorporated building in handcuffs. The headline of the article read, 4 accused in multi-million-dollar procurement fraud arrested. He smiled. Maybe Art's lawyers aren't who he thought they were, he said aloud to himself. Since his Spanish was weak and he had no one to talk to in English, he liked to hear English speech even if he was talking to himself. Anna, he raised his empty glass. To Mr. Tom. Thank you, Anna, he said, taking the cocktail, sipping it, and looking at the dark blue Pacific Ocean peacefully. Tanya, who?